Hi, this is Jonathan Carr, CFO of Armis. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast with Jack Sweeney.
This is episode 1075.
It's called the RAG model. It's Retrieval Augmented Generation. And so think about this as a container of data that you put into that container. And now the AI, the LLM, is just pinging against that container of information. And so I can put like my sell sheets, or I can put, my support contract, my support documentation, in that particular container. And as I run queries against that RAG model, and I find that I don't get the answers I want, now I can curate that material with the right answers that I want. And so I can train that model over time where I'm not going out to the ether, right, to the internet to get the answers, because you can have hallucinations and other, wrong information coming back to you. But if you contain it all in your container and you own that data, now you can get a much higher efficacy around the data that the questions that you're asking against the AI model.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak to CFO Kevin Rhodes of Extreme Networks. Early in his career, Kevin was an auditor who literally rode along with truck crews for Waste Management Incorporated in order to track profitability at the ground level. He clearly was on the right track because by the age of 32, he had already stepped into his first CFO role. 6 other CFO tenures would follow. One was 8 years in length, one spanned 5, another 4. Kevin has staying power. Along the way, he's gained deep expertise in recurring revenue models and go-to-market strategies. We'll talk to Kevin Rhodes about those and much more on today's episode. We'll begin right after this. Hello, we're speaking with Kevin Rhodes, CFO of Extreme Networks. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Nice to be here.
Great to have you, Kevin. As you might know, we always begin by asking our CFO guests to go back in time, get in the time machine, and try to identify those experiences they feel prepared them to advance into finance leadership. What would come to mind for you?
Sure. I started my career in public accounting, right? It was a short amount of time, but I learned how to tick and tie and the importance of reconciling down to the penny. I think more importantly, the notion of getting it right, the first time, if you will, measure twice and cut once philosophy. Of course, that helped me with a solid base of GAAP accounting as well, which I think is important for any CFO. And so it also provided me, the drive at that time to secure my CPA license, which I did. Moving out of public accounting, I moved into industry. I loved being an operational finance controller. I worked with a company called Waste Management, right out of public accounting. I previously interned for them in college, and so that was a coming back to them. And that was a great company. I spent about 6 years there, and we were really a finance-driven organization in the early days. We acquired a lot of businesses. We found ways to improve the businesses that we acquired. It was all about operational improvements, and we tracked the monthly operating metrics, and we measured our KPIs across all those locations, and we compared those results. So, I would say, from my perspective, that kind of, focus on data and driving more efficiency in the organization was really, good for me early in my career. I then went back to business school. I attended Babson College here in Boston area. That really helped me learn more about business and just think strategically. It was certainly a team and kind of, a case study based approach. So I did that. I graduated and then by the ripe old age of 32, I landed my first public company CFO gig, which was obviously earlier in my career and certainly was thrown into the deep end of the water and learned how to swim very quickly. But that company was focused on IT consulting and specifically corporate performance management, which is today's data analytics. I learned how to move from kind of spreadsheets to dashboards to predictive analytics. Since we consulted in that world, our CEO had a real passion for the technology and to use it ourselves. I also completed 8 acquisitions while I was there. So that was a good, learning experience for me. After that, I stayed in the tech world. I kind of, loved the tech world. I loved the idea of being in the tech world and using technology to improve, businesses. So with a couple, pre-IPO startups is where I really, was in my, I'll call it mid to late, 40s. And then now I'm enjoying my fourth, CFO public company, position. I have responsibility for data analytics, sales operations, your traditional finance, tax, treasury, and IR functions. But my career has now been primarily in recurring revenue models and SaaS software, which I really enjoy. So I'd say it's really, CPA, kind of accounting early in my career, then getting the MBA, and then really data driven, were the three, key aspects that really prepared me for being a CFO.
I have to say, your bio really does pop out. There are seven CFO tours of duty, and these are, some of them are, they vary from 8 years to, one is 5 years, one is 4 years. So you invested real career years at these companies. It wasn't just like transactional. And back at Waste Management, and again, it's always interesting to learn who you were, who was that young guy back then. You got into a corporate development role there. Is that right? And is that sort of, again, so you're not this auditor really type. You're already being recognized as someone who can play a different type of role. Am I right about that, or would you put it differently?
No, I played a number of different roles when I was at Waste Management. So I first started at a hauling company, and I'll tell you a little story about that later. But I first started as a controller within a hauling company, and then we went to 3 or 4 hauling companies that we were responsible for. So we had a little bit of a group, reconciliation of who was managing the finance for all of those. Then we created an accounting center up here in Massachusetts. That was actually my move up into the Massachusetts area from Connecticut. And then eventually I moved over into an area where we were just focusing on, buying companies, integrating those companies, and working with the corp dev team to be able to do that. Corporate was writing the checks, but we were identifying the acquisitions and then integrating them ourselves.
And okay, you mentioned going to Babson. It was an interesting choice there. Tell us about why you chose Babson. And we've had other Babson alumni on. They're kind of loyal alumni, if I have to say that. But why did you go to Babson? What was your thinking? Again, it's more of an entrepreneurial program from what I understand.
It is. And actually, I studied under Ollie Thorpe, who is the CFO for Ford Motor Company for, several courses. They have really, really good professors. I think that the teaming atmosphere at Babson really appealed to me. I think the entrepreneurial finance element of it also appealed to me. I really enjoyed it. I did it at night. So this was hard, studying for the CPA, you're always working really hard, and then you're studying at night, and I did that for a couple of years. And
wow,
I was a glutton for punishment and went back to Babson for my MBA at night and had 2 children during that process. So that was about 3.5 years to get through it. So you're doing your first full-time role and you're also taking classes at night. So I remember fondly those days of being so busy, with the Babson experience. But I can't say enough about it. Is really remarkable.
I just want to, for other career builders out there, would you have done this differently if you had to do over again? I mean, that sounds like such a grind. It really does. That chapter had to have been challenging.
Yeah, so I was lucky also because I got the full thing paid for. A mentor, of mine, Mona Eliason, was the CEO of Eliason Group, and she saw some, brilliance, I guess, in me and said, listen, I think you should go back for your business school. I'm willing to pay for it. There was a catch though, which I thought was interesting. I'll pay 100% for an A, 50% for a B, and nothing for C. Well, I graduated summa cum laude because I wanted the whole thing, paid for, and was able to achieve that.
And again, how long is it after you graduate from Babson that you sort of enter a CFO role?
So towards the end of my Babson MBA, I was already the CFO at the age of 32 there at Water Technology. So I was just finishing up probably the last couple courses when I was at Edgewire. Yeah.
Wow. Now, you do go down the tech path. Am I right about that? Have you remained, have you jumped out of industry and back into tech, or what's your path look like? Is it largely all tech?
It's largely all tech. So I would
Yeah.
say recurring revenue models
Mhm.
across the board. Some of those models were more services oriented, software oriented. One company, for instance, was a 3D manufacturer, a printer manufacturing company. So we were selling the hardware, but also we had a licensing model on the back end. And also the recurring nature of the model was a razor blade business model where you were buying all the filaments to go into those printers as well. So I've always been in business either trying to SaaSify the business or been in a SaaS business and understand those metrics. So I do like it a lot. I like the recurring nature of revenue. Obviously, it helps with building value for the business, and lots of investors really seek that, and it's a value driver for those businesses. So if you can change that element within a business, it can be remarkable.
Again, I can't get away from that number 7 CFO chapters. Really, maybe it's more. Correct me, but you have such a point of comparison. And similarly to my industry question, what about ownership here? Capital, or some of these PE backed? Were some of them private? Others were public. Can you tell us a little bit about the 7 companies you were once part of?
Yeah, I'd say 2 were VC backed. Another 2 were private equity backed, and then we've got actually I think one went public in there. So and then one of the 4 is public, and then the rest were all public companies. But I've always had some element, because being in the Boston area and many startups or many private equity backed firms are either in kind of the East Coast or West Coast. I don't think you ever get away, from a company with investors. And my investors are either PE or VC or public company, but I think at the end of the day, they're all looking for something similar, and that's value creation. We're always focused on that first and foremost.
Are there any numbers or that you can put forth with us? I mean, how many M&A, how many deals you've been involved with over time? If you're taking companies public, those types of transactions, are you keeping a scorecard of some kind for yourself?
I'll be honest with you, Jack. I don't have a scorecard in terms of that. I've been involved with sell side, buy side transact. For instance, Duck Creek was the last company that I was at, a public company. We sold that company to Vista Private Equity, and that was a $2.6 billion transaction. So that was the largest transaction, sell side that I had. I've been involved with probably over 50 transactions from an M&A perspective, either buy side and sell side. From an IPO perspective, I've been in companies that were either already public, or I went into a pre-IPO company that I ended up leaving there before they went public, but they ended up going public shortly after I left. And so there's a number of different, but again, scorecarding is not something I do track. It's just, to me, it's about a collection of experiences, right? And are the experiences that we have in one company or another, can they lead to outsized results, for the future company?
So I get to ask you also this question. I mean, you first stepped into a CFO role in 2001. So here we are 24 years later. You better than most could tell us whether this role has truly evolved. Think back to 2001 and sort of the C-suite person you were then versus the role you play today. Has that role really changed or evolved, or what would you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, the role of the CFO has changed. And I think when you think back in time, the role of the CFO typically was a finance person, someone who was responsible for closing the books, developing the annual budgets, forecasting the future. And that's really what it was limited to. And in a public company, naturally, you had investor relations, but even investor relations historically was really a supporting person to the CEO who was talking to the investors. I think things have really changed. And I think part of that will be data and data analytics. And so having a real penchant towards data driven, decision making, I think is a really important, area. For me, for instance, I've always leaned in on the sales side. And so, to me, a company's growth, their trajectory is all about two things: the go to market and the products that they develop, right? And if you've got the right go to market and you've got the right products, a lot of things will solve themselves.
You've seen this trajectory of the go-to-market model just so quickly evolve, I would think, particularly over the last 10 years. But I mean, if you were to go back in time, again, to some of your earlier CFO tours of duty, what that model looked like then, what was available to you then to get a read on your customers versus today, is quite different, I would imagine.
Quite different. And today, I'm thinking about the go-to-market in particular. You're looking at, pipeline building, right? You're looking at your conversion rates, win-loss rates. If you win, why do you win? If you lose, why do you lose? Do you have that information? How many marketing touch points do you have on a particular opportunity? Is there cream that rises to the top in terms of those touch points? Are some more efficacious than others? I think all of those elements are very ripe for a CFO to get involved with, to help understand and be that consigliere to the CEO, especially as we think about resource allocation within a company. Where do we put more resources? Is it marketing resources? Is it salespeople? Do we need more, sales engineers involved? Because the complexity of the sale is very high. All of those are things that we can have a say about. And more importantly, I think we can bring the data to bear that influences the CEO to make decisions, for the best of the company. But it's all data driven, decisions that are being made.
It's just such a great opportunity to have someone like yourself. Forgive me, I'm going to ask you again to go back in time here before we find out about Extreme Networks. I want to know how you spend your day to day as a leader, as a C-suite leader, finance leader, versus how that was spent 15 years ago. Is it possible for you to think a little bit about, what's changed here? I never did that back then. Now I have to do this. What's changed?
I think what's changed a bit here is the lens of which we look at as a finance leader. Traditionally, it's looked at just at finance, and I think we've opened the aperture a bit to the organization to think about the business and the value drivers of that business, and think a bit more about the financial model that the business sits within, right? And so that spans a lot across the board when you think about how do we compete, and we compete better. I think resource allocation is certainly like when you're doing your annual operating plan, it's not about a budget. It's really about thinking about a 5-year plan and what's the trajectory that the company wants to go on. And if you will, there's an island over the horizon. You can't see the island, but you need to get the boat there somewhere, right? And so at the end of the day, I think many people have thought about traditional finance as being close the books, do the operating plan and forecast. And I think today it's much more about, what is the business we're in? What is the financial model? How do we, generate better outcomes for our investors with optimizing certain areas of the business that are not traditionally owned by finance, that finance can have a say in how they're running. And most of that is being, developed or honed with data analytics. And I find that many finance leaders now need to have a data analytics, focus to them so they can get the data out of the systems and be able to inform the organization about, the KPIs that drive the business forward.
Let's jump to our business segment and find out about Extreme Networks. What is this company about today? Tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Extreme Networks is a leader in solving the complexity of building and running a wireless and wired network, right? The company is, if you will, we're kind of the connective tissue of the society, if you will, when you think about it, because it's the foundation for every technology within an organization, whether it's enterprises or schools or airports or stadiums. even hospital systems, manufacturing environment. Everything touches the network, and we rely on the network for our mobile devices or our computers to work. And so we at Extreme just make that easy, right? We make it easy to design and deploy networks that fit the needs of the organization so they can focus on, basically achieving their goal. What we've done, we're in a pretty big market, segment, right? We compete against Cisco, HPE, Juniper Networks and others. Those are the competitive set, and it's a very large market. So we're a smaller player in that market, and we're in what I call a challenger brand. So not only do we compete on the technology itself, but I think some of our magic sauce, our special sauce, if you will, is our goal of making networking really simple. We're an easy to do business with company, and we try and make networking just really the complexity of networking, make it super simple. So that's what we do. We focus on the customer experience and making sure that is as good as it can be for any customer.
You joined the company 2 years ago. Can you tell us when you joined, what is the opportunity that you see for the company? What is the chapter that you're helping to open?
Yeah, when I joined 2 years ago, when I came into the company, right? So I had a little bit of stint with the 3D printing company on the hardware side, but not a lot of experience. But in talking to the CEO and talking to the board about what the desire for really our company is to SaaSify the business, to make it much more recurring. And that's what we're on a journey to do today. We sell hardware, and that hardware, whether it's access points or switches that sit in the telephone room, is the hardware element of it. But what we're doing is we're basically creating a cloud software experience for people to manage the network. And there's this convergence of AI and security, right? People want to make sure their networks are secure, and then managing your cloud all under one platform to make it easy to deploy and manage that network. So, for me, I've been really focusing my efforts in the company to try and drive more recurring revenue. And we're doing that through a number of different go-to-market motions, as well as, just the way that we're doing our strategic pricing as well.
Can you mentioned AI already, but as a CFO, how do you see AI fitting into the company's strategy here, long-term strategy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways. I think about AI in two different ways, right? The AI is really going to be internally, how are we managing AI tools to make ourselves more productive? And then externally, how do we build AI within our own technologies that make our company, easier to do business with, and in fact that our customers can manage their networks with that AI in a better way. So from our perspective, I'll start with the external, right? So externally, we have a tool that's called Extreme AI Expert. And it's this conversational interface within our Extreme Platform One, which can securely and effectively combine the public data with the customer's private data. And that'll create this, kind of these proactive recommendations. And that helps the customers to find the information that they need to solve their problems, within their networking environment. It also cites the sources so that, human users can double check that information. That builds trust, et cetera. So that's what we're doing from an external perspective. From an internal perspective, because, the IT organization, has been really focused on developing AI internally. We found the two use cases that were best to go after was helping our salespeople with information that they can use in order to be better at selling, and also the resellers. So we sell through resellers, and we wanted to create AI tools for those resellers to be able to also, communicate with end customers and be able to sell better. So we focused on that first and foremost. And then we're moving down the line to, HR, functions or finance functions or other functions as well that we can find low-hanging fruit and make, ourselves more operationally efficient there.
We're speaking to finance leaders frequently about the ROI on their AI investments. Is this something that you keep a close eye on? I can't imagine you're going to say no, Jack. But how do you evaluate and measure the types of investments in AI that are now required to keep that competitive footing?
It's interesting. There's a lot of investment in AI today, right? There's investment in the hyperscalers. There's an investment in the industry in general to make sure that there's enough AI computing power, if you will, to manage all that. What will be good for us is that all of that AI will go through the network eventually, and there'll be more and more network traffic that we'll have to manage, which is a good thing for us. From an ROI perspective, people really need to think about, where's the low hang, is it embedded in your product? And if so, how are you going to monetize that? Are you just building technology that makes your product more sticky? Well, maybe there's a retention ROI there. Or is it, something that you're going to monetize separately and charge people for that AI? What I'm seeing early on is that people are going to develop within their product AI capabilities, but not charge for them, monetize them separately, but monetize it as part of the product and the product strategy, which is going to be a harder, ROI model for them, because now you're really looking at it as, does this AI that I develop help me with better stickiness factor? So I get a better retention of that customer. Is customer satisfaction going up? Customer satisfaction, the only way to measure that probably is also retention. And so that's probably the best way that we can imagine, companies looking at AI. On the internal side, AI can be measured more around, product, efficiency in general, right? So do we have fewer people we need to hire? Can we automate more processes and therefore we don't need to hire more people there? Is there a potential for AI to enable us to reshift, people's workloads to other areas where we can, automate, some of the functions that they have today? So there'll be other, I'll call it soft benefits there from AI as well, as we continue to move upstream and adopt more and get more powerful AI over time.
Have your communications with analysts, shareholders, can you share with us their questions about AI? Is there a particular message that you're trying to get across to them when you're talking about AI investment?
I think that the AI investment conversation with investors today is, will it move the needle? If so, how much? And is there a benefit to you as a company as more and more companies adopt AI in the future? Those are probably the two most relevant areas where we spend time with investors on. As I mentioned earlier, we do think there's a rising tide here. With more AI means more coming over the network, and we do believe there will be a rising tide. There's also kind of a get back to the office mentality. And so many companies that are moving back into the office, they've got a lot of employees that are still in a hybrid world of online video versus in person in conference rooms. But again, that's a use of network. And so they've got to make sure that they, as they get back to the office, that they've got the right networks to manage all of those workloads.
Can you tell us something about when you're having conversations regarding concerns over data privacy? Extreme Networks, one might imagine they're familiar with these discussions, and it's always been a chief concern, but correct me.
Yeah, I think AI in general, if you use AI, it's searching the web, right, for information. What started to happen, and this is what Extreme is doing as well, both internally and externally, is we're starting to create. If you're not familiar with this, Jack, it's called the RAG model. It's Retrieval Augmented Generation, and so think about this as a container of data that you put into that container, and now the AI, the LLM, is just pinging against that container of information, and so I could put like my sell sheets, or I can put, my support contract, my support documentation, in that particular container. And as I run queries against that RAG model, and I find that I don't get the answers I want, now I can curate that material with the right answers that I want. And so I can train that model over time where I'm not going out to the ether, right, to the internet to get the answers, because you can have hallucinations and other, wrong information coming back to you. But if you contain it all in your container and you own that data, now you can get a much higher efficacy around the data that the questions that you're asking against the AI model. And that's what we as a company have employed, so far as a strategy around our AI.
It would be interesting to learn your thoughts about the finance organization and how that's likely to change going forward. And it's likely to have a different talent mix. It's not going to look like the accounting department that you had back in 2001. Tell us about how your finance organization is likely to evolve in terms of the types of people you're trying to attract.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at Extreme, like I said, my responsibilities kind of span multiple departments, which I love. I love doing that. We're an international business. About 50% of our revenue comes outside the United States, and the other within the United States. For instance, I oversee sales operations, IT, and then I've got a SWAT team of sorts. We call it Expand, which is Extreme Process and Analytics and Data. And that group is I've had my last 5 companies. I think it's critical because you have to have a dedicated team to develop those insights into the business, define your data governance, the metrics, and then the best practices for driving those. And so, in short, I did make some changes. For instance, creating that Expand team was an important thing that I had done. I would say there are more optimizations than reorganizations, right? I added a couple of very strong FP&A team members with investment banking experience, for instance, and we shifted our sales commissions that were split between finance and sales ops 100% into sales operations. That's just to, if you will, have one hand to shake when things go right. And we emphasized really a focus on our long range plan. Like I said, that island on the horizon that we want to get to in 5 years. What's the path to get there? And so we spent a lot of time building that view out and what are the drivers, of that model. And if you will, we also built in what if scenarios so we can manage things like if tariffs happen, what do we do? Yep. And so we've got, those what if scenarios built in as well. On the IT side, I've added more technical resources versus outsourcing much of our development. That's been a good change as well. We've transformed a couple of our large systems, in particular our quoting and CRM systems. We also are in the process right now of implementing a new Oracle ERP system, and so that's in the process as well. To me, it's all about making sure you got the right people, processes, and systems in place, and then you allow your teams to execute the priorities and strategies you've worked on together, as a team.
We're up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And we're just looking for one moment of insight you've had along the way. I know you've had, many of these daily. Kevin, back in time, is there a story you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Happy to. Early in my career, I was able to see, how a business was run from an operational perspective. When I worked at Waste Management, after my days of auditing, the only thing I knew was really 2 things, and that was grabbing a pencil and a clipboard and writing stuff down. And so when I first started back with them, I really wanted to understand the business. And so I jumped on a truck and I wanted to learn the business and how it operated. So the one thing I did learn how to do is track data, if you will, like an auditor. And so, I started to collect data. So I measured the distance between stops and the tonnage we picked up and, the time we spent from one pickup location to another. And at the end of the week, I went back to my office and put together a quick profitability analysis. I knew what the cost of labor was. I knew the cost of the truck, the fuel, the maintenance, disposal costs. And so I had all the costs and I knew the revenue per customer. And so when I pulled together this spreadsheet back in the Lotus 1, 2, 3 days, I came up with a customer by customer profitability analysis. What we found was amazing, right? First, those customers that were near each other were highly profitable. Those that were not were very unprofitable. And so at the end of the day, what we said is, Kevin, there's gold in this information. Go spend a few more weeks on those trucks and do more profitability analyses. And I did that. And then we incentivized this when we made decisions coming out of that. We incentivized the salespeople to densify our routes. And then we became one of the most profitable business units in the region at that time. That ended up getting the attention at the corporate level. And then that was made the standard, across the entire company. And so that was, I'll call it me not really knowing what I was doing or what I was uncovering at an early age, but just knowing that you got to get the data set. And if you have the data and all the data, revenue versus costs, you could come up with customer profitability. When you come up with that, you can then make decisions in the company, and those decisions can have a profound impact on the business. And so that's really what we ended up doing. And like I said, we were very finance oriented, as a company. And so it was all about, cost of acquisition and route density, and making sure that we were, building out, if you will, a really, robust, but also profitable business. And a lot of these businesses that we acquired, a very fragmented family owned industry, ended up being, highly successful and very profitable. And so that was part of, really one of those strategic finance moments was the data it's all about the data. It's all about profitability analysis and the analytic skill sets that you have to make these actionable insights and drive, better performance.
We're going to move to what we refer to as our mentoring round. We want you to think back again to that first time you stepped in back in 2001. I'm sorry, I'm taking you all the way back there. The first CFO role you had. You arrived there. You thought you had observed CFOs for a good number of years during your career. You had the Babson degree. You should have had everything. But there was something that surprised you about the role, something if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice back in 2001, what would it have been?
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece of advice, for me is, I think first and foremost, grit, determination, perseverance, it's all about that, right? And so making sure that I feel like if I would tell myself, like, you will be successful. Don't worry about that. Success will come if you've got grit, determination, perseverance, and that you're going after the right things, right? Yeah. I think the second thing I would say to myself is, like, be faster at decision making. If there's one regret I've ever had, it's like not making decisions fast enough. And so that's the other thing that I would really say is make sure you do that. And then I would push myself earlier in my career to understand all of the aspects of a company's go-to-market strategy, from funnel development to positioning to messaging, pricing, sales motions. There's so much gold in that hill, right? In terms of, like, there's so much importance around a company's go-to-market strategy, and if effective, coupled with really innovative technology, those are the two magic things that you need. And you can really make a difference in terms of how the company competes. If you've got the right go-to-market and the right innovative technology, that's 90% of what you need.
Excellent. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. What's something, you've been there 2 years now, what does most of your colleagues not know about you? Something from your past, an interest that you have, something you pursue, anything?
Sure. I would say, a tennis player. In the summers, I'd love to be out on my boat in the Boston area. I'm a really data-driven person. As a company,
Yeah.
I often, people in the company would say, Kevin loves, for instance, a book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. And there's one particular part of that book, if you've ever heard of it, Jack. It's a great book, but it talks about the British cycling, and it talks about, this concept of, just a 1% difference in improvement in a particular area to itself is not very meaningful. But when you add up a bunch of 1% improvements over time, you can really, have outstanding results. And this concept, that David Brailsford brought forward with the British cycling, and they ended up winning 5 out of 6 Tour de France's, and they ended up winning lots and lots of gold medals because he kind of broke down everything around the cycling and just improved it 1%. And he called it the aggregation of marginal gains. My teams hear this from me all the time. They hear about, are we thinking about the aggregation of marginal gains? Are we improving things just 1% here or there? Because it's not the one thing, it's the 37 things that you improve. And I would say that's probably the thing that people internally would say, yep, that's Kevin.
That and the go-to-market together, marginal gains over the go-to-market strategy. Okay.
Yeah, everything.
Is Atomic Habits, is this your book selection for us? If I'm not, is that what you'd like to share with us, or would you have another one for us?
No, it is. I mean, I like listening to podcasts, but I also like and books on tape. But I will tell you, to me, that's the book that I go back to. It's a reread, every couple of years again, because I think it's just a great one. So anybody,
it is a great selection. So thank you once again for bringing it up and reminding us about it. I would say 2 years ago, I forget when it came out, but we heard about it for a while. But Atomic Habits, everyone. We are up to our final question. We're going to ask you to look forward finally. And what we'd like to know is your 12 priorities for the coming 12 months as a CFO. What are your priorities for the coming 12 months?
Yeah, I'd say, priorities for me, make doing business with Extreme easier for our customers and for our partners. We'll do that by leaning into the AI that I talked about, to create more efficient training and enablement and insights. We'll also, make sure that, the vendors in our space, they'll be working with our partners to rationalize, what stays and what goes in terms of their new blended portfolios. We'll be helping them improve, their time to revenue with our tools and training and AI that helps them, get their information and insights quickly and move their businesses forward. I think these are the areas that, it's back to go to market efficiency, making sure we've got the right technology, making sure that we've got the right focus areas on how do we, solve those customer needs. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's just making sure that we have happy customers, we've got the right business model in place, and we've got the right financial metrics that we're tracking internally to make sure that we can achieve, our end goal, which is stock price appreciation, better financial models, but most importantly, you do that with happy customers that stay with you and buy more. That's what it all comes down to.
Kevin Rhodes, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.